And we are recording, and I'm looking for the closed captioning.
I'm going to go ahead and get started.
I got it. Yep.
And hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. We are coming to you live from the Mendocino College campus. Today is our fourth installment of the Fall 2024 Wellness Workshop Series. And today's topic is exploring mental health support with Eric Alfkin. Eric will talk to us today about suicide and some mental health support systems.
And first, we will introduce ourselves as we will be today's co-host. So I'm Lisa Larimer-Burtis. I'm the Mendocino College Health and Wellness Counselor and Coordinator. And I just want students to know that mental health therapy is free. If you are an enrolled student, that's my cheerleading moment for the workshop. And I'm excited that we've been able to bring a variety of speakers and information to students this semester. And I want to encourage all of our participants to provide feedback at the end of the workshop. And if you're viewing this workshop online on our YouTube station, and it's after the fact, if you would just send an email to wellness@mendocino.edu to give us some information on how you liked the workshop, was it helpful to you, and what would you like to see in the future? Tasha?
Yes, thanks. My name is Tasha Wetzel. I'm the Learning Disability Specialist here at Mendocino College. I have my position's kind of a multi type of position. I'm an instructor professor. I also work with the Disability Resource Center by providing a learning skills lab for students on campus. I also work with students interested in accommodations in their college courses based on a learning disability. And I also assess students for learning disabilities and teach appropriate study skills and strategies, and have paired up with Lisa this fall to host these workshops. And I think I'm going to jump into the next part. Let's go ahead and get started. For the next 20-30 minutes, we'll be talking with a special colleague from Mendocino College. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll address them towards the end of the discussion. And so with us today, we have Eric Alfkin. He is a former peer support specialist who has struggled with thoughts of suicide for most of his life. In 2021, he completed training to become a facilitator for Alternatives to Suicide peer support groups and has been actively co-facilitating on an online group based out of Humboldt County ever since. Alternatives to Suicide peer support groups were started in 2008 by the Wildflower Alliance and have since spread across the US into other countries. Welcome, Eric.
Thank you. The first time I wanted to die, I was about 13 or 14 years old. I was in junior high, and I remember laying in my bed, just feeling the darkness around me and feeling so much pain. I came up with an idea of how I would do it, which wasn't a realistic idea, wouldn't have worked. I didn't try it. But the important point here is that I was barely a teenager and I didn't want to exist in this world. I made it through, clearly, but it was rough. And there were a lot of rough times after that where I don't really know how I made it through so many times. Compare that to a little over a year ago. I was living in another place. I was out of work. My prospects were not looking good. There was a chance I was going to end up on the street, homeless. Some terrible things that happened to people I cared about. It was a really dark place to be in. But unlike that previous time, I had somewhere to go. I attended the Alternatives to Suicide support group that I co-facilitate. I was able to share what I was experiencing. I was able to talk about it in a very real way with people. They were able to accept that and surround me, and we talked it out. Other people talked about what they were going through. And after that, I felt so much lighter and so much more capable of making it through. From there, things improved. I'm working, I moved, things are looking great. I made it through that rough spot. And I'm very grateful to that group for this. What's the difference between those two times? Clearly, the one, I didn't have community. The second, I did, which made all the difference for me. I'm going to talk about alternatives to suicide support groups. And I'm going to talk about it in a way where I'm going to talk about fundamentally how they work. And you can use some of these tools and some of these approaches in your own life and how you have conversations with people, whether you're someone who suffers or you know people who are suffering. This is a way to really connect and help. The elements of this are there's a price to silence. There's a heavy, heavy cost when people cannot talk about what they're going through. There's a set of tools called VCVC, which I'll talk about. These are different words, and they make up a toolkit which help connect and help people feel safe to talk. And I'm also going to talk about the core values that are built into alternatives to suicide and how those work and how we connect with people. Back to this question of how did I stay alive all these years? And really the answer is I don't know. As I said, there's a huge cost to silence. I didn't talk about what I was going through, and that meant everything rattling around in my head, all the emotions inside, the anxiety that felt like a claw might as well just be ripping its way out, or the just eating myself up inside. I kept that all to myself and I didn't talk about it. And what happens in that silence is it's an echo chamber that just grows and grows and grows. These things don't just sit there in silence, they become so much stronger. There was a lot of white knuckling. It was a lot of just making it through day by day. Why didn't I speak up? Why was I in silence? And there are a couple of parts to that. One is, and before I say this, I want to be clear and say I'm not going to play any blaming. There's no blame here. This is not about what people have done wrong. 'Cause you may, if you're listening to this, you may have done these things. I want to move from these are the things that don't work to these are the things that do. And that's the focus of what I'm talking about. On that note, I have what I call the unhelpful reply bingo. When someone talks about being very depressed or wanting to end their life, they're very common things that people say. And I know this because I've heard them. I know this because I've talked to other people who have heard them. There is but you have so much to live for, or you should be grateful for what you have, or it's not really that bad. Or my personal favorite, you're just going to hurt the people who care about you. These things cause people to close up and shut down and not be willing to share what they're really feeling. They feel like this person is not listening to me and they're not safe and I'm already in pain. I don't want to be in more. The other element of this are and forced, interventions. When I was about 18, 19, I was put in the hospital 3 times. These were traumatic experiences for me. The very first one, it seemed like they cared more about the fact that I had had sex with another man than they did about the pain I was in and what I was going through. I was given an anal examination in a mental hospital, in a psychiatric hospital. There's no reason for that. It was not related to anything. I was asked if I was sure that I didn't have AIDS. Someone came into my room early one morning and forced me to take some heavy antipsychotic medications. This was not something that had been prescribed to me, and this was not a person who was supposed to be doing that. As far as I know, nothing ever happened to this person, even though it caused me 2 days of very horrible, it was a very horrible experience. So of course, ever since then, whenever I'm with a service provider and they ask me if I'm in any danger of hurting myself, no, I'm not. I'm perfectly fine. And I think a lot of service providers know that this is what happens. So again, lost in silence, and silence causes isolation, which further increases the pain, and it just grows from there. So here's the question. How do we escape the silence? How do we let people open up and talk? And this is where we get to VCVC. As I said, these are 4 words. Each of them comprises a piece of a toolkit that we can use to help people feel safe to talk. And in AltaSu, we use this all the time with each other. First, we have validation. It's so critical to validate people when they're talking about something painful. the impulse can be, this person's in pain, I need to stop it. And so we jump to, it's not that bad, or you shouldn't really feel awful, or just don't think about it, be positive. But it shuts the person down by validating things, by saying, hey, that sounds awful. That must be horrible to go through. Or I can't believe that person did that to you. Or I can't believe that you survived that thing. Validating what they feel will help them feel safe and help them kind of open up and just a little bit to say, like, oh, this person might be someone who's safe to talk to. The second thing is showing curiosity. What are you going through? Tell me more. Have you ever been through this before? And if you did, what got you through the last time? Showing that you genuinely care to hear more also makes the person feel safe and more likely to open up. The third thing is vulnerability, being vulnerable. We're vulnerable with each other all the time in alternatives to suicide. Someone might share, I went through this, and someone else says, yeah, not the same, but I went through something similar. And that shared vulnerability opens things up. If you're someone who doesn't suffer through that and someone is talking to you, you can show vulnerability in a different way. You can say, hey, I don't know what to do for you. I don't know how to help you, but I can sit and listen and I can be vulnerable while you share with me what you're going through. It makes all the difference in the world. And the final thing, which is really kind of a culmination of those other things, is community. Altissu is not just a support group, but we make a community. We connect with each other. We tell stories. We talk about cats. We talk about the fun things and the funny things, and we talk about the horrible things and the things we've survived. And we even talk about attempts, and we talk about things that really dark things. And a lot of times I think people are afraid to have those conversations because they're afraid that if I listen to somebody talk about that, that's going to take them to a dark space and they're going to be more likely to want to kill themselves. But the reality is it's a paradox. By expressing that, by letting it out, the person can feel so much relief and so feel so connected that you sat there and listened to them talk about this thing. And I've witnessed this myself. I've seen people come into the group, they're brand new and they just sit there. And we don't have a requirement for people to talk. So sometimes they just sit there for a while. And I can't tell you how many times someone has said, hey, I came here thinking I wasn't going to say anything, but I just want to share, blah, blah, blah. It's because the space is so inviting and so safe and so validating. And it's amazing how that sense of community kind of builds and lets people talk about it. I also hear when they start to talk about it, if they've never been able to talk about it fully before, you can just hear them being so choked up on the emotion. You can hear them trying to get the words out or put the words together. And over time, those words start to flow a little more freely, a little more easily. Can hear the emotions start to leave their voice, and they start to become a lot more just calmer and a little bit more at peace. And it is an amazing thing to witness. It is an amazing transformation to see. Giving people the freedom to talk about the things that we don't allow them to talk about in other spaces. It's transformative. This philosophy that built all of this VCVC comes from this idea that we're about connecting people, not about saving people. A lot of times suicide prevention becomes about the suicide. I need to stop this person from killing themselves. I need to make sure that they live. Wildflower Alliance, when they built this model, they asked instead, why do people want to die? What's this coming from? And kind of narrowed in on it's this silence, it's this lack of connection. And so that's what we do. We connect. We don't concern ourselves as much with if people survive or not. And again, it's a paradox. It's amazing how much better people feel when we're focusing not on the act, but on the lack of connection that they feel in their lives. This connecting, this using VCVC and this way that we connect with people, these are built off of these core values that kind of underpin everything. And so some of these values are really important. And they're also, as I said, things that you can take in your own life and the way you interact with people. Part of that is, a lot of it is about sharing power. As a co-facilitator, because we have two facilitators, our role is not to be authoritarian and say, here's the rules, A, B, C, this is how we do it. We express the values, we uphold the values, we help make it a shared space where everyone is responsible for creating the space that is supportive and compassionate, and we're able to be there for each other. And by sharing that power, by giving that up, we gain a much better space. We focus on letting people make meaning for themselves if and when they want to. A lot of times people will say, again, the unhelpful reply bingo, this happened to you for a reason, or you can learn something from this, or God did this so that you can grow. And the problem with that is that it's you making a decision for the other person of what their experience should be, allowing them to have some time to just say, you know what, this just sucked and I wish it didn't happen, and just experience that. They may at some point get to the point where they're like, you know, I've been able to learn from this and I've been able to grow, but that's their journey and their decision on when they reach that point. Letting people be experts on themselves is so key. It lets them decide how they want to move forward. It can be very, very easy when people are suffering to say, oh, if only you would stop doing this or you would do that, it would really help you. But that control, that taking control over somebody, oftentimes connects with trauma they may have had about people making decisions for them. And it can make for them to close off and to isolate even more. So even if you don't agree with decisions people make, just that recognizing that they have the right to make those decisions can be really important. Holding compassion for people when they talk about things is a huge value, and it flows through everything that we do. Working from a space of mutuality and not fixing. We talk all the time about being responsible to each other and not for or over each other. We don't say we're going to come in and fix people. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. There is no magic thing you can say that's going to make someone say, I don't want to kill myself anymore. It's true and it's kind of sucky. But letting go of that idea, just being there as a genuine human being, recognizing that you can be there for people, you can build bridges instead of life rafts, you can make connection and let people be and work through things the way that they do. We recognize that the impact of trauma is very real. More unhelpful reply bingo. That happened 20, 30, 40 years ago. Why are you still so upset about it? But when it comes to trauma, it could be 40 years, but it's like it was yesterday or it's happening right now. And recognizing that and listening to people when they struggle with stuff that happened a long time ago is a huge part of our values. Consent and choice are also very critical. We make sure that people, they speak when they want to, they hold back when they want to. We don't require check-ins from everybody in the group. We take space and make space. Sometimes we take space to talk about what we need to talk about, and then we make space for others when and if they want to. We're comfortable with silence. Sometimes somebody says something very deep and we all just sit there for a few minutes to just kind of process and not jump in and try to change the mood or try to change something. And sometimes you hear somebody that process something, they'll say something very meaningful in that moment when they've had a little silence to process. We recognize that people have different responses to injustice. One person might experience something and they go off and become a crusader and they make big changes and they do things. And another person lives their life in shame and regret and pain. And those are natural responses. And it's important to not judge people for the responses that they have. These things, the price of silence, the use of VCVC, and these underpinning values are core to the alternatives to suicide approach. They're very important. They have saved my life in more than one way. And I'm very, very grateful to be a part of this group, to be a co-facilitator, to witness the journey people make. I'm grateful for the opportunity to listen to people and to be there. And I hope that you've all learned something from this and open to questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. That was very moving. I totally appreciate the VCVC values. It makes so much sense to me in creating a safe space for people to just be with however they're feeling in the moment without having people having to jump in and fix things for them. Um, when you were talking, you talked about this kind of flow. It's like at first somebody might come into the group and just really can't formulate the words, but over time they can express more about what's going on. And it's kind of like when you were talking about that, I envisioned, this space where we have all of this stuff moving around in our minds because it hasn't come out. And it's like one little butterfly coming out of your mouth, like the next little, and then pretty soon, it's all just coming out, and it has a place, and there's these compassionate arms, that wrap around all of that for a human. So I don't know if there's a question in any of that, but it's like that was the visual that, as you were talking, that's how saw that in my mind. Maybe if you could talk just a little bit about that experience and holding space when someone is just starting to, speak those first few words of what's really going on with them.
That's a good, that's a good question. I think the fact that we're comfortable with silence is very helpful there. Because a lot of times in most spaces, if someone starts to talk about something difficult and they're kind of getting choked up, someone can want to go in there to kind of save them, to like change the subject to like, oh, you're uncomfortable, I'm going to save you. Or they might try to finish their thoughts for them, be like, oh, because you're doing this because blah, blah, blah. But when we're comfortable with silence and we can sit there and give people a chance to kind of let it kind of bounce around, or they start to speak and they're like, no, that's not quite it. And then they pull back and then they have a chance to sort of reformulate, and then they can say it again in a different way, or they can barely, talk. It's a giving them the space. And again, that's why we talk about taking space and making space. When someone is taking space, we make sure to make space for them. And a lot of times when someone will say something, particularly somebody like that who's brand new and they've just talked, there is a moment of silence afterwards to kind of give this impact, to be sure the person is done speaking. And also when somebody talks, it's very clear that what they're going to say is going to be thoughtful and not just a quick response. Because we do that all the time to each other, right? We act like we're listening, but we're just waiting so that we can jump in with the thing we want to say. So letting people know with that silence that we're going to give them the space to figure it out, or we're going to process and we're going to think about it and say something reflective in response. It does help people to get through that process.
Thank you, Eric. I did have a question. You're talking about the mode that you do them through Zoom right now, right?
Yeah.
Has it ever been in person? Is that part of the model, or is it a model that came about to use more, that you could reach out to more people through Zoom?
It was actually started in person. When we started the group, it was in 21. It was during the pandemic, and so online was a very clear choice, which ended up being a good idea because I've since moved 2 different counties, and it's been great that I've been able to stick with that. I did for a short time try to start one here in Ukiah, but nobody was attending, so I stopped. But we have, for example, accessibility is important in the groups, and so when we do the openings, we talk about requesting if anyone has any access needs that they need to do, they can talk about. That was based in a physical space, but it's adapted really well to a virtual space, because someone might say, I need to have my camera off. I just really hate seeing myself. Or I may not say much, or I'm going to need extra time when I talk because my brain is just all over the place today. So we take that idea of access needs people have and adapted it to Zoom, and it's works out really well.
Any other questions for Eric? Eric, I'm just so thankful for you visiting us today. And I was thinking, like, oh, I could show this in my psychology class. So I think what I'll do is I'll do a little extra marketing to our instructors that they might include this in, some of the classes that we have available. It seems very pertinent, for like our nursing students, for example, would really benefit, and our human services, students would find it very beneficial, I think. And then at least they're aware that this amazing group is available. So it helps push the word out. And we don't have an effective audience today. And I've already announced that people can provide feedback through wellness at mendocino.edu. And we will be putting this up on our YouTube channel at some point. I'm hoping, well, by the end of the semester, I'll have that live. That's really great. Any final comments, Eric, before we stop?
I think on the note of what you said, we've got the website, the altisu-humboldt.com, which has the meeting information, the Zoom link, and also a contact form. If people have additional questions, they're more than welcome to reach out to that goes to both my co-facilitator and I.
Okay, and we'll make sure that we include that with the additional information as well. I'm
Awesome.
going to go ahead and stop our Actually, before I remind people of an upcoming workshop, but I guess I'm going to stop the recording.